In the previous tutorial video, we show you how to use the if combined with else. Basically, let's do a very quick recap and see how we can use a slightly more complicated structure to improve the program. Okay, so now basically for the if statements, whatever that's inside this particular branch over here, the condition can be any Boolean expression. So this is a typical one. You simply got relational operation, you got another relational operation, you got a third one. You simply combine them using a disjunction, which means as long as one of them is true, it's considered as a error condition, which means the error condition overall is true, which means this is an error. Okay? That's how we did it for the previous video. Otherwise, if all the error conditions over here are simply just false, that means the disjunction overall is false. Then we'll simply just bypass whatever that's inside the body of the if statements, and we're going to execute line by line for the other branch. It's either one or the other. Okay. So now for this current video, we're going to show you how we can improve this program a little bit by using something called else if. The reason being, you can see that from the previous tracing over here, if you remember what we did previously. So now in the previous video, we got test 1, we got test 2, and we got test 3. Okay, all the three cases will actually end up only executing this particular line for the error case, and it will only set system.out.println error over here. However, from the user's point of view, we don't necessarily know what the errors is. I'll just illustrate to you very quickly, and then we want to see, so just to see why we need the improvement. We want to have a better way to really distinguish between whether this particular kind of error happened or that particular kind of error happened, right? That's how we can justify the use of else if. So now let me just re-execute this program again, and I will show you. For example, enter integer balance. If I simply say minus 100, and we know that this is going to make the very first error condition true, right? It's going to make overall true. So that means it's going to print out the error. But the error itself does not specify which error it is, right? It's just going to say, okay, let's say minus 100 and it's 10, for example. You'll simply say error, launch the program again, but we don't really know which error it is. We want to be able to distinguish. So now let's enter the program again, launch it. So now let's say the balance is not negative, but now the amount to withdraw will be negative. Let's say minus 1000. Okay, if you do that, it's actually printing out the same error message over here. So that means it's just satisfying the same the error condition over here overall as a disjunction, but we don't really know which one actually is satisfied. So we cannot do some discrimination on printing out the error message. So that's something we would like to improve for this current video. And the way to do it is by using something called else if. Okay. So now I'm going to solve the same problem over here by using a different construct. Hopefully you can see the difference between the two constructs. I'm not saying which one is better or which one is worse. It's really up to you which one you want to use, okay, for your application. So now let's go back to the package explorer. So if you simply just copy if statements app2, okay, and then paste over here, and we'll say if statement app3, okay, it's named for you automatically. Okay, it will say okay over here, and then so now if you double click on app3, let's close app2 to avoid confusion. So it's the same problem that we are trying to solve, the same. Okay, but now I'm going to rewrite the structure over here slightly differently. Okay, just to illustrate to you a final syntax for the if statements. Okay, so far in the previous video we learned about, first of all, if you only get if without the else, and if you got if else. So now we're going to say if else, and in the middle we can insert as many else if as we like. Okay, so now let me show you. Basically I want to split this disjunction over here into different places, into different parts for me to check. Okay, so now I will do, okay, I can say else if, okay, and then I got three different error conditions. So now for the first one, I can simply cut this over here and put it here. So now else if, after that, within the round parenthesis, you just have to specify some Boolean expression, which can be as complicated as you might need. Okay, but I'm just going to put it like this. Okay, else if, and then I'm going to put another else if. Okay, I will fix the syntax error in just a moment. And else if over here, amount, oh actually, you know what? It's better, let me just undo and let me do it properly. Okay, beg your pardon. So now the first condition will be this, and then the second one will be this. Okay, the third one would be, okay, and then the third one here, let me just copy, cut it, and then there's a third condition over here. Okay, so now we got error condition, and then we simply get rid of disjunction. Basically, the new program over here is going to behave slightly differently, okay, but it's basically the same logic over here. We're saying if the first error condition is satisfied, we're going to print out the first error message. Otherwise, if the second error condition is satisfied, we're going to print out the second error message. Otherwise, we're going to print out the third error message if it is satisfied. Otherwise, that means there's no error. So we're going to go ahead and do the normal calculation. Okay. So now since now I have different branches for me to specify the body over here, so I can do a little bit more detailed error message. I can say error over here, initial balance should not be negative. Okay, that's the first error message over here. And also for the second one, we can say error because we are only printing this out under the circumstance where the amount to withdraw is negative. Okay, amount to withdraw should not be negative. Okay, and the third one over here, amount to withdraw should be smaller than the balance, right? Because in this case, it's larger than or equal to, but it should be less than. Okay, so you can see that because of the else if, we can split the original disjunction as a single Boolean expression into 3 parts. Okay, that could be advantage for using else if. Okay, so there's one part, there's a second part, and the third part, and then the fourth part. Okay, so we got 4 parts over here, right? So we can either go this way, or this way, or this way, or this way. Okay, let's see exactly how this will work, and then we'll trace it all together. Okay, so here is how it works at the runtime. Let me explain very briefly. We're going to check, again, it's sequential execution. So we're going to execute the code from top to bottom, right? So at the runtime, we're going to check this condition first. If this condition is satisfied, we're going to execute the body over here, and then the rest will just be skipped. Okay, that's a case number 1. Case number 2. Let's say if the condition over here is actually false, that means we're going to check this condition over here. If the condition over here is satisfied, then we're going to execute the body over here, and then the rest of the if statement will be ignored. Okay. Third case, if both these branch conditions are false, then we'll simply check this one. If it is true, we're going to execute the body over here, and then the else part will just be ignored. Fourth case, if all the 3 conditions over here are simply evaluating to false, in that case, we're just going to execute the body over here, right? So that's just very informally speaking verbally, but let's illustrate that. Okay. So now, first of all, I will simply execute the program. Let me make sure I do it properly. Right click on app 3, and then you can say run as Java application. Okay, so now if I say, for example, -10, okay, withdraw, I would say 20. Okay, initial balance should not be negative. Okay, it's basically printing this out, this one here. Okay, and then let's go back here, and then go back to the console over here. Let's execute the program again. So now, let's say the initial balance is actually 100, which is positive, and then I say -10. And then it will say amount to withdraw should not be negative. That means we're executing this block of code. Okay? Let's try another one. So if I try another one, let's say 100. However, I try to withdraw 150. In that case, it would say amount to withdraw should be smaller than the balance, right? We are executing this block of code. Okay, let's do one more case. Fourth case. If I try this one here, and then enter integer balance, and then I would say 100, and then 44. In that case, it will give me the correct result, which is 56. Okay, so these are the 4 cases I would like to illustrate to you all together. Okay, so now what I would like to do, I would like to do a snapshot. Okay, so now let me just do that here. So I'm going to copy this block of code, and then try to see what happened. Okay, so now let me move on to my iPad, and then I'm gonna illustrate that. Okay, so now let's look at the program that we just developed in Eclipse. So now let's consider the 4 test cases. The first 3 test cases will illustrate the error cases, and the last one will be the normal case into the else branch. Let's see each one of them in detail. So for this example, you can also understand how the execution flow will look like for the 4 different cases. And that's how you understand the meaning for if, else if, and else. This kind of statements. Okay, test number 1. Let's do one by one over here. Let's say test 1. What we want to do is, let's say the initial balance, we're going to make it simply minus 100, okay, which will trigger the first error. And also the amount, we're going to make it, let's say simply 50, just normal. Okay, let's say that's the first test that we're going to do. Okay, let's see how it can be executed. Okay, for the first one, let's use green to illustrate. So execute the first line over here. So it's going to say enter an integer balance, and let's say we enter minus 100. So that means this part over here, it will be minus 100. So minus 100 will be stored into initial balance. Okay, and then we say go to the next line, enter an amount to withdraw. In that case, amount over here, next input and next end will be 50. So now we enter 50 here. So that means 50 will be stored as the amount. And now let's try to execute the branch. So here is how the things will work. We're going to check each of the branching condition from top to bottom one by one. As soon as we hit the very first satisfying branch, we're going to ignore the rest. Okay, let's see how exactly this will work. So now, initial balance over here for the first condition, initial balance is minus 100. So now we know that minus 100 less than 0 will actually evaluate to simply just true. So that means this particular result over here is already going to be true. Okay, so that means this is satisfied. So we're going to execute all the lines in the body of this particular if branch. And the meaning is for the rest of else if, else, we're just going to bypass them. Okay, so now, so the only thing that's going to be executed will be error. Initial balance should not be negative. Okay, so now let's highlight the execution flow. So the execution flow will be, we execute, let me just do it better. So we execute this line over here, we execute this line over here unconditionally, and also execute this line, and then we evaluate this condition here, which turns out to be true over here, so that we only execute the body of this particular if branch. Okay, and for the rest, it's simply bypassed. Okay, so that's the execution flow for test number 1. Okay, let's try the second one and see what happened. Okay, so now I'm gonna move to a second page over here, and then I'm gonna paste the diagram again, the code fragment, the same fragment of code, but now I'm gonna do test number 2, which will trigger the second error for the negative amount. So now what I will do is I'll say test 2 over here, where the balance is simply, let's say, 100, which is valid, and also the amount to actually withdraw, let's simply put negative 20, okay, which is invalid. Okay, let's see how this trace can work. Okay, so now let me use orange over here. So now for the first line, we're going to say enter an integer balance, and then so here input next end is going to, let's enter 100. So it's a 100 over here. So 100 will be stored for the initial balance. And then we execute this line here, enter an amount to withdraw. So now for this one here, we're going to enter minus 20. So minus 20 will be stored inside the amount, minus 20. Okay? So now we're going to evaluate each condition one by one. When we try to evaluate this condition over here, initial balance is 100. So now we're going to evaluate 100 less than 0. Apparently it is false, right? So that means this condition over here, 100 less than 0 is going to be false. That means we are not going to execute the body of this particular if branch. What we should do is we should move on to the next branching condition. We have to go on and see the very first satisfying branching condition. Okay, so that means we're going to evaluate this one over here, and now we're going to evaluate amount. In this case, is minus 20, right? You can see also minus 20 over here. So minus 20, we're going to evaluate minus 20 less than 0. In that case, it's going to be true. So this is the very first satisfying branch. So that means this condition over here is going to be true. That means we're going to execute the body of this particular if branch, and then we're going to say error, amount to withdraw should not be negative. And for the rest of the else if and else, it's just going to be bypassed. Okay? So now let's see exactly how the execution flow is. So what we're going to do is we're going to see orange over here. Okay, let me just undo that. Okay, so now this line over here, and then this line over here unconditionally, and then also this line here, and we evaluate the very first branching condition, but it simply evaluates to false. Okay, so that's why we bypass its body of the only line is its body. Okay, so we bypass this line here, so we don't have that. And then we evaluate the second branching condition, which happens to be true in this case. So that means we're going to execute the body of this if branch, which contains only a single line, and that's it. We're going to bypass the rest. Okay, so this is the execution flow for test number 2. Let's see the execution flow for test number 3, which will trigger the third error. Okay, let's do that. So now we're gonna copy, we're gonna paste the same block of code. Let's try the third case. So test number 3. So test number 3. Let's say the balance is actually positive 100, and the amount is actually also positive, but a little bit too large. Let's say 150. That will trigger the third error, supposedly. Okay, let's now just go back here. And now, let's see how things will work. Again, we're going to execute this first line over here. Okay, enter the integer balance. And now in this case, we're going to enter 100. Right, so this input.int, input.next int will be 100. So that means 100 will be stored into initial balance over here. And then enter an amount to withdraw. That'll be the next line to execute. And then we're going to say, we're going to enter 150. Okay, so that means user will enter 150, and then the amount will be set to 150 accordingly. Okay, so now we're going to execute the first branching condition over here. So now initial balance is 100. So with 100 less than 0 will give us false. So that means the first branching condition over here is simply just going to be false. That means we bypass its body of the line. Okay, it's a line of implementation over here. So we bypass that, and then we try to evaluate the second branching condition over here, which will be amount, which is 150. 150 here less than 0 is going to give us false again. So that means this condition here will be false, which means we also bypass the only line inside the body of this else if branch. Okay, and so we had to move on to the next one. So if we move on to the next one, so amount over here is, as we know, 150. And then the initial balance over here is 100. So we got 150 larger than or equal to 100, and this will be true. That means over here, the error condition, the third one, is now true. That means we have to execute its body over here, right? Only a single line. We're going to say error, amount to withdraw should be smaller than the balance. Okay, so that means the else part is going to be bypassed. Okay, the else part, yes. Okay, hopefully you see that. And then let's see the execution flow. Okay, what we have is this. We execute this line here, and this line over here, and this line over here, this line, and we evaluate the first error condition, which happens to be false. Okay, so that means we bypass the body of that particular branch. And then we try to evaluate the second error condition, which is also evaluating to false. In that case, we also bypass its body of implementation there within the brackets. And also for the third condition over here, it now evaluates to true. That means we're going to execute every line of code inside the body for this particular else if branch. Okay, that will be the execution flow, and then we bypass the rest of the else statements. Okay, that's the execution flow. I really want you to really compare to see exactly how the execution flow will work. It's really important for you to understand. Okay, so in the case of number 1, we bypass. Okay, let me just use yellow. In the first test case over here, we bypass everything over here, right? And for the test case number 2, we bypass this one here, and we also bypass this one here, right? And for test number 3, we bypass over here, we bypass over here, right? It's really important for you to see exactly one branch will be executed. Only one, exactly one, no more than one, just one. Okay, let's do test number 4. Okay, finally. So now we're gonna paste the code over here, and then we'll see how that works. Okay, test number 4. Okay, so now let's put test number 4. So what I would do is I would say balance is going to be 100, and also the amount is going to be not too large, let's say 56. Okay, and then let's try to trace the code and see how exactly it will work. Okay, so now for test number 4, let's go line by line. Line number 1, enter an integer balance over here. So now we enter 100 over here. So input the next int will be 100. That means 100 will be stored for initial balance. Okay, and then we print the next line, enter an amount to withdraw, and we're going to enter 56. So input the next int will be 56. That means amount will be saved for 56. Okay, so far so good. And now we're going to evaluate the branching condition one by one until we see the very first satisfying branching condition. Okay, and then we bypass the rest. So now for the very first one, what we're going to have is initial balance, which is 100, right, over here. So we're going to evaluate 100 less than 0. We know that it is false. So that means for this very first branching condition over here, it is false. That means we'll bypass the body for this particular if statements. And then we go ahead and to evaluate the next one. Go top to bottom, right? And then for amount over here is going to be 56 as we previously stored. So now we're going to evaluate 56 less than 0. In that case, we know that it's also false. That means for this branching condition over here, it's false. If it is false, we're going to bypass its body over here, right? Only a single line. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead to evaluate the next one. Okay, we haven't seen any satisfying condition yet. So now we're going to evaluate the third one over here. So the amount, as we know, is 56, and for the initial balance, it is 100. Okay, so we got 56 larger than or equal to 100. So we know that it is false as well. So now that means this branching condition, the third one, is also going to be false, which means we also bypass this particular line of code, right? It's its body. So now that means the else part, typically we say the else part is a default case, which means if all the previous branching conditions have failed, that means this else part is the place that we can always execute if all the previous branching conditions fail. So that means we're gonna execute line by line inside the else branch, okay? Given all the 3 error condition over here, all of them are false. Okay, now we're gonna say the resulting balance will be initial balance. In this case, it's 100 minus amount, which is 56. So that will give me 44. That means we're gonna store 44 as the resulting balance over here. Okay, let's print it out. So now initial balance, in this case, initial balance, which is 100, after withdrawing the amount, which is 56, and then has the resulting balance, and the resulting balance, which is the thing we just calculated, which is 44. Okay, that's how we calculate it. So now let's see the execution flow. And in this particular case, basically the execution flow means that every branching condition has been tried, but all the 3 branching conditions actually fail. That's why we gotta go to the else part. Okay, so let's try to see that. Okay, this line unconditional, this line unconditionally executed, this line also unconditionally executed, this line as well. When we evaluate the very first branching condition, because it's false, we're going to bypass its body, okay? And then we evaluate the second branching condition. Also, it is false, as we said before, right? And then it's going to bypass the body, right? And then we go ahead to evaluate the third branching condition over here, which also turns out to be false. Okay, so far none of the bodies for all the three first branching if statements have been executed, right? You can see so far this has been bypassed, this has been bypassed, this has been bypassed as well. So now we go to the else part. When we go to the else part, that simply means we're going to execute line by line over here. So this line here, this line here, and this line here. Okay, if you look at the previous annotation here, we're going to use the yellow color to actually say which part has been bypassed, right? So now let's do it as well. If you look at this last case over here, this part has been bypassed, this part has been bypassed, and this part has been bypassed as well, okay? So now really study carefully and compare the four cases for you to understand exactly how the if, else if, and else. And in general, you can have as many else if as you like. Okay, so now let me just summarize and then we are done for this video. Okay, so this is the rule for the else if. Okay, so in general, you may have say if something over here, and then you have some statements. I'll say statement 1, and then you have else if some other condition over here, and then S2, and then as many else if as you like, and finally you got else. Okay, so here is how it works. So basically, you're going to start evaluating the very first condition over here. If it is satisfied, you're going to execute S1, and then the rest will just be bypassed. Okay, or you can have to say, I evaluate the very first condition over here, but however it is false, in which case I have to evaluate the second condition. If it is true, I'm going to execute its body S2. Okay, and then the rest will be bypassed. Okay, and then if it happens that all the branching conditions, let's say the first branching condition is false, and the second branching condition is also false, and all the branching conditions are false, finally, it will just go to the else part and then execute the body, right? So that's kind of the general rule. Try to really understand this by using the example, and then you should be ready to do all the tasks for part 2 for lab 0.